So let's start off making a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up game. You know, I don't actually remember the last time that a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up game was made. Like, I don't even know. The last one I played was probably like R-Type for PlayStation. Hang on for a second. I'm gonna close the door. I seem to be killing a cow over there. So a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up is actually really simple. I mean, they're kind of like, if you think about it, it actually has a lot of similarities with games like Pong and Breakout. And the main distinctions in side-scrolling shoot-'em-ups are that they typically move you in a direction. They can also be top-down shoot-'em-ups, but they're not like the arena shooters like Geometry Wars or like the Smash TVs. So what I'd like to have you guys make today, and help you through this, is a side-scroller that at the very basics has a character that's going to be moving up and down, and the character can shoot projectiles, and there's going to be a series of enemy spawners that are going to move with you throughout the level. And as we kind of did last week, we're going to break down this concept of a game into very, very small chunks and attack each chunk separately, one at a time. So we're going to kind of start off with making the player, and making the player be able to move up and down, and then we're going to make a single projectile that moves from left to right, and then like a single enemy that moves from right to left, and then eventually we're going to get to the full-fledged players moving up and down with enemy spawners and you being able to destroy them. And then next week we'll actually put in some more behaviors to make the gameplay a little bit more robust, but this is just a simple prototype. I'm using a side-scroller here only for the reason that it has kind of at least a camera and like a very simple environment that's set up to be able to be used. So let's we'll start off with this, and you guys can start off as well. I kind of think that it might be better for you guys just to watch and like listen and pay attention to what's being done, and then you can review this stuff for your homework for next week. So I'm going to wait for the project to load here. Okay. So this is the side-scroller template, and it has a few things going for it as far as like the camera and the fact that there's a character in there. But I think that I want to have this character be able to move up and down, and also I don't really want to give them the ability to move left and right. Maybe I do want to have them be able to move left and right, but for our case it's just going to be a simple like move up and down shooter, not so much a free-form movement shooter. So let's just start with that, and then we can improve that as we work with it more over next week. So let's just set it up so that this guy here is able to fly up and down in the air. I want to be able to hit up and go up, and hit down and go down in the air. And then we'll work on replacing him with something more space shooter-like. So this is the character blueprint that actually drives this guy, and as you can see, he has a mesh. And the character mover component actually has the ability to let you control a character as if he was flying, and the property for that is the default land movement mode. This is essentially what you are telling Unreal is considered a surface. By default it's walking, but we actually can just set it to be flying, which ignores the effects of gravity completely. So with just that one change, I can play. And I can't move up and down anymore. And if you see, I'm actually gliding a little bit, like as I let go, which is kind of cool. So it's kind of hard to tell that I can move up and down, but I can. And the way that I'm going to set that up is I want to bind some keys to let me move up and down. Right now, W and S don't do anything in our game. So if I go to the project settings here, I'm going to go to project settings and go to input, and I'm just going to add some more mappings for moving up and down. Currently there's only one mapping for moving right and left, but I can add another one for move up. And I can map that to the W key as well as the S key to move down. So I can scale that by -1. So if I open up the character blueprint, he already has movement input to move right and left, and he has input to jump. We don't really want him to be able to jump, so I'm going to delete that. I'm going to keep this around for now, and I'm going to right click and say input move up, and there's this axis event, which is the same as the one that was added up here, and I can just take this function, which allows me to add movement input, and duplicate it. The key here is that this direction of where I'm moving in the world is currently -1. This is basically for how you move left and right. But I can set it to be +1 in Z, and this will let me move up and down in Z when I hit W and S in the game. If I hit W, my guy walks up, and I hit S, and then my guy walks down. Right? So he's actually flying now. So it's kind of like the very first step, right? In order to have a shoot 'em up, you have to be able to move up and down, right? Cool. I kind of also want to push the camera off to the right a little bit because I want this camera to be leading the player. So I'm just going to drag this guy, the camera object, a little bit over maybe this many units just to see. So that's kind of where I want the space shoot 'em up to be, right? And let's replace the mesh here. I don't really want this ragdoll guy. He's not really very space shootery, so I'm actually just going to delete the reference to him. And there's like a bug where it doesn't update the character in the preview. But if you just open him up and double click on it, there's nothing. And then I can go in here and add a static mesh. Maybe there's something I can use as my preview. Maybe my guy should be a lamp. I'm not sure. What should he be? He's going to be the hero table. And the hero table I'm just going to rotate so it's not so. Push him out. He kind of spins in a direction. I think at this point I'm just going to disable moving left and right as well. I don't really need the ability to have him move left and right. And let's just change the spawn point here. Let's spin it around so that it's spawning him facing the right direction. Here's my table. Notice that when I move up, it actually makes him face towards me. So we're about to fix that right now. So I want him to actually constantly be moving to the right automatically. So this right now is basically saying, hey, when I press a key, move right. But what I can do is instead on tick, I can do the same thing. I can actually have him move right on his own. So I can just have him move in positive, maybe I'll have him move in positive Y, and I'm going to scale it down to be like 0.2. So he's moving to the left, which is not the right direction. So I'll move him into -1. -1 here. So now this guy is automatically moving from left to right. He'll actually collide with the environment as well, so he'll get stuck. And we can change it so that in the case where he collides, he basically will die. I mean, that's kind of like what shoot 'em ups are do. what shoot 'em ups do, but in this case he can kind of slide off of things, eventually make his way up and over. Okay. So that's like the very simple basic player movement behavior, right? It's like just a couple of functions, one to move him up and down, and one to move him to the right. Maybe I can actually have him move a little bit less. Let's clean up the level at this point too, because I don't really want these things to impede the progress of the game. So I can take this, and I can just take this whole thing, and just duplicate it. Oops. Duplicate that there. So I always have a floor of some kind. I can duplicate this guy here as well. So now I have like a proper shoot 'em up, and you can put like a ceiling on here. So he has a roof over his head. So you can't like move above that. And just to give some sense of like depth, why don't we put some like BSP in here. Let's put some actual meshes in here. Props. Shapes. And I can just duplicate this guy. Scale him up. So get some 3D perspective in there, so you can see that the depth of whatever's in the background, right? Get some parallax in there. It's kind of the nice part about having like a third-person shooter. Just take some of these things here. Just dupe them. So maybe even just rotate them. Dupe them here. Scale them. So get rid of the back walls. Get rid of some of this geometry here. Okay. Starting to look more like a shoot 'em up. Maybe I can actually take the time here to build some lighting too. Some weird artifacts with the additional BSP that I added earlier. So the next thing I kind of want to do is set it up so that I can spawn a projectile. Now it's all dark. Because the light is actually like over there somewhere. I can lighten this up. Add some point lights. Thanks, deferred rendering. I can have a bunch of these. Right, so play. Okay. The hero table is ready to go. So, kind of like when in Unity, when we wanted to spawn an actor, we would kind of specify a spawn point here. We would pick a point on the mesh that would be a good spot for projectiles to spawn from. So we can do kind of the same thing. So I'm going to shrink the character capsule here just to make him not so tall. Maybe increase the radius a little bit and maybe move this thing. Okay, that seems good. So let's add a spawn point for a projectile. And really all we need to do to specify a spawn point for a projectile is to add a scene, and we can call this thing the spawn point. And this little guy right here, we can just move him out in front of the chair. And if you want to see where the spawn point is, all you have to do is add something like You can add a billboard that's parented to him. So if I just parent this guy here, and then reset, that's where the spawn point is going to be. And I can make this thing visible in the game. So what I want is so that little thing in front of the table right there, that's going to act as a spawn point. So that's where the projectiles are going to spawn from. So I go to my character here, and I kind of need a projectile to spawn, so let's just make one. Go to blueprints, and we're going to make another actor blueprint. This time it's going to be a projectile. And let's add a static mesh. We can make this thing the actual projectile. And I don't really want to do anything else except for add a projectile movement component. And this is how you actually have the projectile move along in space. So then I can set the initial speed here, maybe 300, like that. Compile. And just to test this thing, I kind of want to just place him in the level. So I'm going to grab this projectile. I'm going to put him in the level. Maybe I'll just give him a material so he looks different. I want gold. One other thing too. If you have a projectile, you can't actually have a static mesh as the default component. You actually have to have a sphere. Some primitive component needs to be the base. This needs to be the root, otherwise it won't move. I make this mistake constantly. I don't actually know why Unreal does this, but you need to have this root sphere be the actual base. So I'm going to lower the static mesh here and maybe scale it down a little bit to match. See that? And now when I play, projectile actually is flying through the level. Like that. It's flying towards positive X, so if I spin this guy this way. So there's my projectile. It shoots out and falls. And I don't really want it to be affected by gravity, so we can turn that off as well. So I can just set the gravity scale to be 0. Save. And so there's my projectile, and as long as I orient him correctly, he'll actually fly out. So I have a test projectile which I've proven that he works when I placed him in the level. So all I need to do is go into the graph here and hook up something so that I can spawn one of these things in a level. Very similar to what we did for the Angry Birds project. So I go into Edit, Preferences, and I go to the Input Bindings, and there's already a binding for Jump, which I don't need. I'm going to make a new binding for Fire, which I can just set that to be the left mouse button, and I'm done there. And go back to my character, and I can right click and do Fire, and there's my input. I'm just going to have this thing spawn an actor from class. All I have to do is spawn my projectile, like so. And then I want to grab my spawn point from the left, and I want to get the transform. Make a transform here. And I'm going to get the world location of this spawn point. Actually, I could just do this instead. Just get the world transform off the spawn point so that it takes the rotation of the spawn point as well. Now if I play and I click, projectiles are spawning. I'm currently being blocked by them, so it looks like I'm not pushing them out far enough. So maybe I can just move out my spawn point a little bit here. and so also, I ran into this later. If you're running 4.6 and your projectiles are doing that, this thing where they're not moving, you run and you get this little error dialog, and it says something like this, where it's movement update component must update primitive, but does not have a root. This is a bug in 4.6. The way you fix this is you go to your projectile, take your projectile movement component, duplicate it. I hit Control W, delete the original, recompile, and that will fix the problem. I don't know why it does this, but there are my projectiles. They're kind of moving really slow, which is kind of weird. They're like a wall of death, but we can speed this up. I just set their speed to be kind of low so I could see them moving. I can just crank this guy up. Looks better. Right. I mean, it's all placeholder stuff. Like, it's a table shooting gold balls in the middle of nowhere. But like, it's kind of space shootery, right? And if I just go here and take a minute, that sphere is actually in the one. It's kind of cool. You can put stuff in front of the camera too. You can actually play and make it as a new editor window. You know, with some music and stuff, you can kind of see. And add some animation on the ship so it moves. So we should actually add some enemies, I think. I think enemies will help a little bit in the game. And enemies are actually very similar to projectiles. We can actually make an enemy either a projectile as well, so it can have the same movement, or we can actually control the movement and have some AI on it. So we'll start with just having the enemy be based off a projectile. If I take this projectile and I can just duplicate this thing, and I'm going to name this thing enemy. I can go in here and go to his components. Go to the static mesh here. And I can change out his static mesh. Sure, that's an enemy. And I can kind of spin him forward. Bring him up a little bit. And we can even add something like, just like what we did for the power-up, we can actually make him spin around his axis. So let's just put him in the level to start. Let's slow his movement down a little bit, like so. So let's test by just putting this guy in the level. Actually, I should give him a different material too. There we go. Drag this guy into the level. Make him point this way, towards me. Did I not point him the right way? Can't tell. Oh. Can't even tell what direction he's supposed to be pointing at. Huh. So he's firing into the scene, so that means that he needs to be rotated 180 degrees, 90 degrees this way. It's kind of weird. I'm not actually sure why he feels the need to do that. As you can hear. So he's an enemy. I'm not really happy with that. I actually kind of want him to be... He should be flying into the screen now, right? Rotate him 90 degrees to the left. I don't actually know what is happening there. I think it's because he's moving in positive X. Huh. Just to solve this problem, I am going to add an arrow pointed that way. Certainly looks like he's moving that way. Certainly. Oh, he's moving more than 90 degrees, actually. Shouldn't really matter too much. Rotation follows velocity. Max speed. Yeah, let's just live with this. And let's just have this guy, because like projectiles work okay, and you notice actually this projectile, for some reason, I'm pretty sure this is a bug in Unreal. In 4.6, it wasn't doing this in the previous build as well. Yeah, it's definitely a bug. So enemies kind of work, which is what I want to see. We can actually have an enemy spawner, though, if we just have the same behavior as... If we imagine that we can make an enemy spawner by just making another player that periodically shoots, that's essentially what an enemy spawner is. So we can just have a new blueprint. We're going to make another blueprint, which is based off of nothing, and I'm going to call this the enemy spawner. And all I want this guy to do is, I'm just going to actually add a billboard to him so I see where he is in the world, and I'm going to make him visible. And I want him to have an arrow as well, so I can tell the orientation of where he is, make that visible as well. And I'm going to put one of these guys in the level. So there's my enemy spawner. And I just want this guy, from the time that he starts and every 2 seconds afterwards, I just want him to spawn one of those enemies. So event begin play. And it's just going to spawn an actor from a class. There's the enemy. And I'm just going to have this spawn exactly of where my actor is. So I get world transform. Yeah, sometimes this thing is. Get world transform. So the billboard. Just grab the billboard here. So the first thing that happens is he will spawn. Let's put a delay in here. So delay for 2 seconds. And then after he spawns, we're just going to fire this again. And really the proper way to do this is, let's just set up a custom event here. We'll call it spawn enemy. I'm going to plug this into here. And then instead of here, I'm just going to call spawn enemy. So I don't have to drag a wire from one side to another. So basically this guy I can call from wherever, delays for 2 seconds, spawns an actor, and then calls this thing again, which is going to wait for 2 seconds again. So if I play, it's going to take 2 seconds before the first guy spawns. There's an enemy, and another guy's going to spawn. So a spawner for enemies is really just something that also moves with the player. So all we want to do is have this enemy spawner not be static. It actually, every time the player moves, he should move with the player. And I kind of want him to move like as the player moves this way, but I don't want him to move up and down with the player either. I want him to kind of like, I want to put a bunch of these guys, like maybe 2, so that each of these guys spawns an enemy. But I want them to shift to the right as the player moves. And that's also really easy to do. On tick, we're going to grab where the player is, figure out where he is in the level, specifically here in Y. So as he moves, he's moving through Y like this. We're going to grab that, and we're going to position ourselves offset from that. So if I get player. There's these get player functions that you can call. One of them is player pawn. Another one can be player character. These two do the same thing. I'm going to get the player character. This is going to tell me where the player is at all times. And then I can get his location from there. And I can break this vector. And I can grab the y value out of here. And what I can do is grab the y value. And I can add some amount to it. I'm going to just offset him. Basically, I want to offset him from here. I can just measure. From here to the first enemy spawner. So I can measure, it's about 700 units. So I'm going to add about 700 units to it. And in every frame, what I'm going to do is set my own location. I'm going to get my own location. And I'm going to replace where I am in Y with where the player is in Y. If I can break this guy. And I can make a vector. Like so. And I want to keep the X and the Z, but the Y, I want to base it off where the player is. And maybe just for sake of testing, I can make this thing shorter. Oh, it might be negative 300, actually. So there's the spawners. They're moving badly because it's a slow computer. But they're going to be off screen. So if I move these guys far enough, you're not going to be able to tell. There's enemies spawning over there. Let's make sure that the spawners are lined up with the player too, because it looks like they're not. Here's the player spawn, here's the enemy spawners. Move them here. You can actually see them right there. And we can even set it up so that, let's also finally make it so that the balls, the projectiles that I shoot will collide with the enemies. And it's also really easy to do that. We already have a sphere here that's set to overlap other things. And what we do is we grab the sphere, and I'm going to add an overlap. And what we're going to do is grab the thing that overlapped us, and we're going to cast it to an enemy. And if the cast succeeded, we're going to destroy both ourselves and the enemy. So. With the idea being that I can shoot these guys and it kills the enemy, right? And maybe what I can do is have it so that if the enemy collides with the player, that the level restarts, right? So the enemy we know has a sphere on his own, and kind of like the backwards thing, the enemy can detect on overlap if the other actor cast to my character. If that succeeds, that means that we hit the player. What we can just do is open the level again. So whenever any enemy hits the player, it'll cause the level to restart. Right? And maybe you could have like a lives mechanic, right? Like we had in Angry Birds. I'm going to actually move these guys out a little bit more. And then, well, it's not really a game because they're always spawning the same amount, right, every time. But we can randomize it. We can say, hey, pick a random time to spawn. Currently, we wait 2 seconds. You can easily make this thing random float in range and make it wait between 2 to 4 seconds before it spawns another guy. And I can go in my map here. Go to my enemy spawners. Just duplicate this guy. And why don't we make an enemy that kind of also behaves a little differently? Now we set it up so these spawners will spawn randomly, so it's not always the same. But we can add behavior to the enemies as well. I'm going to slow down the enemies a little bit because I don't feel like they need to be that fast. Cut them in half. Okay. We can also get rid of the arrow component. Just like what I had you guys do with the power-up, I can have these guys have behaviors as they're moving. So on tick, I can do other things, like add actor local rotation, right? So maybe I can have them roll. I want them to roll like 60 degrees per second, and I can make a rotation. Right, so the enemies spin. And maybe instead of having them all spin at the same rate, some of them could spin faster than others, or just randomly. We can even have them start off with a random rotation. Because I don't like that they all kind of spin at the same rate. I kind of want them all to start off differently. So on begin play, I can do add actor local rotation again. And this time I'm just going to say make rote, and then I'm going to add a random amount of rote. Maybe anywhere from 0 to 45 degrees. The idea being that not only do they spin, but they don't all spin at the same rate. They actually come and they start off with a different amount of rotation. Right? We can do more. Just like when we had the power-up bob up and down, we can add behavior to these enemies so that some of them will move up and down. Why don't we make an enemy type from the middle guy have an enemy that moves up and down? We'll make this guy the advanced enemy. So I'm going to duplicate this. I'll call this one advanced enemy. And let's expose something that changes what this spawner is. So instead of this guy spawning the same one every time, I can actually promote this to a variable, right? I can say enemy type, make him editable, and now that I've made him editable, I can go into my level here, and these guys now have a property of what enemy I want to spawn. So I can say spawn, the middle guy is going to spawn an advanced enemy, while the other two guys are going to spawn the regular enemies. And the advanced enemy, we can actually make him look different too. None of these are very impressive. I kind of want this, but I want to change the way it looks. So I'm going to change it a little bit. So material, create a material instance off of this guy, advanced enemy, m_advanced enemy. Cool. So there are some properties we can change, like the emissive color here. I want this guy to be an angry red. What are these two properties? Color 1 and color 2. So he'll pulsate. So I can do the. So that's what an advanced enemy could look like. Seems fine to me. Save. Go back to my advanced enemy guy, and now I can pick the advanced enemy material instance, which will make him pulse like that. So he'll look different too, and maybe I can even add another static mesh component to him. He has a couch attached to him. No, I don't know. just really want to make it clear that this thing is not your normal enemy type. Seems good. So what will happen now is now that I've changed the enemy type that spawns in the level, the enemies from the middle guy will be that new one that I created because I changed him in the level properties. That guy lost some collision settings. Oh, right, because our projectile only tests against whether it's an enemy or not. And what we can do is also test against whether it's advanced. Like so. Okay, so let's add some behavior to this advanced enemy so he moves up and down. So I'm going to add a timeline. Just almost exactly what I did before for the power-up. Add a vector. Height. Hide the other two. 1, 2, 3, 4. Make this thing 3-second period. All of these can, this one can be at 0, 0. At 1, it's -3. This one can be 3 at 2. And then this one, actually this one can be 2, 3. And then I can add one here at 3, 0. There were 2 overlapping ones there. And then I can just select all of these and make them auto cubic interpolate. Double check these, loop, use the last keyframe. Now I have height that I can apply. There's my event begin play. And I can have it play the timeline and then add offset like so. So now it'll move up and down as it plays through the level. My projectile still cannot hit it. Because, let's just double check here. Oh, I think it's moving actually towards the camera. Oh yeah. Oh, might be. Let's just reset these guys. So this guy is on 1200 on X, so I can set this guy to be 1200 as well. These guys can both be 1200. He's definitely running into me. I think it's just the projectile here. Ah, here we go. I wasn't destroying the enemy. I wonder if that'll even work. I might have to do more. Yeah, because the projectile's just not hitting him. Here, we're going to duplicate these two here. Like so. So if we try to see if it's an enemy, cool, go ahead and destroy it. If it fails, that's what we're missing right there. We need to actually still ask what object we want to cast. And you can do things like when the projectile is destroyed, you can actually probably go back to what it was doing before. Do this, do this. Okay. We can probably just create an emitter emitter. And play a sound. Like so. Explosion. We can also have it play a sound when you fire, which kind of makes sense to me. It's the fire sound. Fire 01 is not what I thought it was. We're going to play. I'm going to make one. And I'm going to find some music. And then we're finished. Once I add all those things, it will... I'll give you guys the homework. Export wave, desktop here, and let's find some R-type music. We're going to download this. Oh, these are crappy music files. Sure. Okay. So let's go here and let's add the fire sound. Import one. So. Okay, so there's my explosion. Okay, so we can play that guy when we fire. This is the music. So I can import that guy as well. He's an MP3. We could just do this. This is obviously all placeholder as far as like assets are concerned, but the basic gameplay is totally there. And we can take a lot of steps to make this even better, which we'll do next week, to have actual level transitions. You can even add bosses. Like, bosses are really just more of the same kind of thing where you have enemy spawners or even just projectile spawners. And you can even have more complex behavior for enemies where they go and they follow patterns as opposed to moving in specific ways. All right, so the homework is to take and make this with one addition. right now, when I click, it fires a single projectile and stops. I want you guys to set it up so that when I click and hold, it continues to fire projectiles. All right? Let's basically take the work that we did with all the behaviors that are in this video, and instead make it so if I press and hold the mouse button, it'll keep firing, because no one likes to play. And if you have time, you can find some better assets than the one that I'm using for the player and enemies. I don't know if that's possible, but if you can, please do.